for large portions of my childhood, like Haight Street was regarded as like a dangerous place that like you didn't want to be going.
That was San Francisco born and raised comedian Arthur Gaus. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this episode of the podcast, Arthur talks about growing up on a famous block in the city. He shares the story of how his parents met and ended up settling and raising a family in the Upper Haight. Arthur goes on to describe the San Francisco of his childhood, including Haight Street, Golden Gate Park, Chinatown, and his time at St. Ignatius High School. Check back Thursday for part 2, when we'll hear all about Arthur Gaus's foray into comedy. Here's Arthur.
Here's the way I think to do it contextually. I'm from Haight Ashbury. I'm from the same block that the famous Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin house is on. I think it was Jerry Garcia's house. And it was like the big hippie house for all Summer of Love musicians. It was all at 710 Ashbury Street. I grew up, and my mom still lives just up the block on the same block of the 700 block of Ashbury Street. It's 2 blocks up from Haight, the corner of Haight and Ashbury. And of course, like I don't need to tell you guys what's there. Yeah. But anyway, so people always say, "Oh, like what an interesting place to grow up. Your parents must have been huge hippies," and that is not true. My parents were. Yeah, no, my parents moved to Haight Ashbury in the 70s when it was kind of bottoming out and like the drug problem, like the Summer of Love had turned into like the decade of rehab. Yeah. And like I guess you could just buy places in Haight Ashbury for not that much money, so they did. And they were both lawyers and who just moved to Haight Ashbury. And
where did they come from before that?
The Midwest. They came. My mom is from Akron, Ohio, and my dad is from India. Well, my dad, who's no longer with us, he was from Indianapolis, Indiana.
But they're from way back in that middle-ish part of the country, and they're just like, let's move to San Francisco. I heard the hippies are gone. Or like,
well, I think it was more like. I think they both worked at like the top drawer San Francisco law firm at the time, Pillsbury, Madison, and Sutro. Okay. And I think it was like, my understanding is that it was like if you got an offer to go to Pillsbury in San Francisco, it was like, go west, young man. Like you had to take it. Okay. So I that's my understanding. And now why they chose Haight Ashbury has been a mystery to me my entire life, because it seems like almost any other place would have initially suited them better. My mom loves Ashbury Street now. She can't imagine herself ever, like, I think, being anywhere else. But for large portions of my childhood, like Haight Street was regarded as like a dangerous place that like you didn't want to be going.
Right. Yeah, and I'm guessing if they were able to afford a house there were other parts of the city that they could have bought in.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the truth is that like there weren't expensive parts of the city back then. It was all cheap. Right. Well, I mean, not Pacific Heights, but like it was a cheap place. I mean, that's why the hippies moved here, because it was a cheap place to be. Right.
So they moved here. Do you know when? Late 70s, early 80s or so?
70s. I think they were married in I think 78. Okay. And then but they moved to Ashbury Street like right around that time. I think it was all kind of in the same time.
Okay. And do you have siblings, Arthur?
5 of them.
Only 5. Okay. When your parents came out here, when they came out here, did they have any kids already, or?
No, this was
okay.
They had 6 kids in Haight Ashbury.
Wow. Oh my! Almost like
one of them, incidentally, is also a comic.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hear about that later, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we don't have to get into your siblings right now, but so a few years later, I'm assuming 82, 83 or so, you're born.
Yeah, 82. April 82.
Okay. So I am going to assume, like most people, you don't remember your birth. So we'll skip a couple years. Uh,
Yeah, we can skip a couple years.
okay, that's fine. And we'll probably find other people to tell us about 82 to 85 in the Haight. But yeah, what are some of your earliest memories? And they don't have to be necessarily at home, but you know, what are some of your earliest memories?
You know, I've thought a lot about how trying to figure out what my earliest memory is, because it's kind of an interesting question, and I've spent some time thinking about it over the years. And the nice thing is like I have a metric for figuring this out, which is that like I can I have memories. I have a lot of memories of going to Giants games as a really young kid, really, really, really young kid. Awesome. And I can remember certain games where something happened, and then, you know, thanks to the age of the internet, I can now trace back and figure out what the dates of some of those events were.
Oh, that's fucking awesome.
And so I think when I think about like what is my earliest one, like what's the earliest memory that I can trace back and actually tell you a date, I think it's probably like July 1985.
Okay.
Because that was the year because the Giants had the All-Star game at Candlestick, the Major League Baseball All-Star game at Candlestick that year, and my parents went. And I remember watching it on TV and, like, you know, let the record show that took place in July of 1985.
Awesome.
Because I remember my dad coming home from work early, and then all of a sudden they're off and I was like, that's odd. Usually they don't go to the stadium at this time. Why is this babysitter here? You know?
Yes. Who is this person? But
yeah,
you fully remember.
This is all different.
But you remember like all of that situational shit. Do you remember like watching that game and being like, baseball?
I remember. Yeah, I remember being allowed to watch a little bit of the game and then being sent to bed.
Oh, right.
But I do remember that it was a big friggin' deal that they were playing the All-Star game at Candlestick Park, and my parents were really excited about it.
Awesome. Do you know, like, were your fans giant parents? It's not late.
Were my fans giant?
Do you know what I'm trying to ask? Like, were they Giants fans from the moment they got here, kind of thing, or?
No, I think my dad got into. I think, you know, my dad was working at a law firm, and this, I think, before my mom showed up on the picture, and I think it was like, you know, he was like a guy who moved to San Francisco and didn't know anybody, and it's like, well, what do? You know, if you're a single male who doesn't really know anybody in a city, what would I do? I would, you know, I would buy single game tickets to the local baseball team probably every night. And I think that's more or less what he ended up doing.
Okay. So wait, I actually missed something. Your parents actually met out here. For some reason I was thinking.
Yes.
Oh, do you know that story? Can we go back a minute?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I don't know all of it. I know that they were both working at the same law firm, and then at some point, my mom had to find a new job at another law firm because there was a policy against, as many white collar professions back in those days. It was considered, and I think in some ways it still is considered. I don't know exactly what the policy was, but it was they decided it was best if she went and worked at a different law firm because they got serious.
Workplace shenanigans.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, but you know, this is the thing about my folks and lawyers in general, very by the book. So I'm sure that at some point, I like to imagine that at some point, you know, they were having a nice dinner and realizing that you know, that it had gone too far, that they were now, unless they disclosed the fact of their relationship, that they were going to be in violation of, you know, section 13.7 paragraph B of the employee policy, and that like they needed to disclose this relationship and find a way around the policy
Right.
as fast as possible,
or just stop dating. But then we wouldn't.
Well, but they couldn't. They clearly couldn't do that.
Yeah, the magnetism was just too insane.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, what would somebody tell me if somebody told me way back when to stop dating my wife? I would have been like, take a hike, man.
Right.
Like, I don't play that game.
Right. And then your kid would just disappear. That's not cool.
Yeah, and then no kid, not cool.
So. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I for some reason I missed that, but good. So we've got the first, and you think that is your earliest memory that you've kind of objectively.
I have not been able. Well, okay, so I cannot place I cannot definitively place an earlier memory, and Lord knows I have tried, and also Lord knows I have tried strictly by like looking at like the schedule, the like 1985 Giants schedule, to see if I could figure out an earlier game. Right. But I know that like I specifically remember the All-Star game. I must have just passed my 3rd birthday.
Right.
So that's pretty early.
That is. No, I was going to say congrats. That's pretty fucking early. So
well, I was a pretty observant kid.
Obviously. Yeah, the skills started really early. And do you remember, and you don't have to get specific unless you'd like to, but other kind of memories of the neighborhood? Because you grew up in a place that people know about.
Yeah. It was a really happy place to grow up.
Okay.
And there weren't a lot of kids around, but I had lots of siblings. But it wasn't like, this like, like Lifetime movie cul-de-sac where like, there's like 10 houses and they all have kids who are all the same age and they all hang out to each like that. Right. That wasn't it. But it was a really, I mean, it was like Golden Gate Park was still kind of sketchy at the time. It was just that it was kind of the, there was a lot more kind of like you wanted to keep your kids on a path if they were in Golden Gate Park, because there was just a lot more sort of hardcore drug use kind of going on in the park itself. They really had they cracked down on that in the 90s. And it's much better, but we would go to Golden Gate Park a lot, and I remember there being some sort of like danger around the edges. Like we didn't go to children's playground a whole lot because like I think the parent group that like of my of like my close associates, like I think somebody had gotten word that there was going to be a syringe in the sand or something like that,
Yeah.
But it was but so there was stuff like that around, but it was a really happy place to be a kid, because you're like, there's these big hills and there's parks you can run around in, and we had this nice backyard that like I would play with my siblings, and it was a really really great place. But it's sort of like I didn't really realize that it was like a historic place, that like Haight Ashbury was, until I was a little bit older.
Sure.
And then it was like I just thought it was the coolest place in the world, and I still think it's the coolest place in the world. But then it was like you saw a little bit more. We never, the Haight Ashbury that people talked about like so nostalgically and so lovingly was like it was a memory. It was a distant memory by the time I was born. So I heard people talk a lot about in the neighborhood about like, oh, you should have seen this place, when I was a teenager, particularly like, oh, you should have seen this place back in 67, 68, 66, 69, 71, whatever. I just kind of, it was interesting to sit and listen to. Like there was a guy, like when I was a teenager, there was a record store, like kind of where the Carl and Cole and Judah stop is. Okay. It was called Mobster Records, and this old guy would, and he would, and it was mostly CDs, but some vinyl, and he was like always full of stories about like, oh, you should have seen this place way back when. And there was, and like the marquee for the other cafe, which was the comedy club, that was right there at Carl and Cole. That's still up to this day. But
Nice.
it was like, there was the people who, thought, couldn't, it's like they wanted to tell you about the Summer of Love. And then there was like other people who wanted to tell you about the comedy boom in the 80s. And there were other people who wanted to, tell you about some other thing that, they had this great house party they went to in the 70s. And so it was just like a place where people were like, it seemed like it was a neighborhood where a lot of people had really specific memories about it and were like excited to tell you about it. And I heard a lot of those stories as a teenager.
So that was just kind of normal, I would say.
Yeah, it was just kind of normal. I mean, I always...
The place was special.
Yeah, I thought it was, and I still think it is.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you mentioned history at the outset of this little tangent that we're on, for some reason, I also was thinking about like the literal house that you grew up in. Which, did you say that your mom still lives there?
Yeah.
It is like that area is known for like crazy fucking some of the best Victorians in the city. Is that the kind of house you grew up in, or?
Yeah. And actually, what's even funnier is, so like one of my best friends from growing up, like still one of my best friends, but when we were kids, we were like, I don't know, junior high or something like that, and we were just starting to become friends. I invited him over to hang out, and I was like maybe 10 or 11 years old, and they pull up to, they pull into our driveway, and like my friend's dad like explodes out of the car and like bounds up the steps, and he's like, "Do you live here?" And I'm like, dog, I'm standing right here, like, what do you think? And he's like, "I was born in this house."
Whoa.
Yeah. And so apparently my, like one of my oldest friends, really my oldest friend, his dad was born in the house that I grew up in.
Like, not his parents lived there and then his mom, then they went to the hospital, and he was born in the house.
That's the recollection. I don't know.
Let's go with that.
Let's go with it. I mean,
that story's better.
I don't know, but I think, I don't know. Well, either way, he grew up there, and
right.
And then his family that sold it to my parents.
Wow.
So that house has been like on a continuum, like for about a century now.
So cool. Wow. How old were you when that happened?
I was like 10 or 11.
Okay, a little later. Did you have questions for the guy? You're like, where are the ghosts?
No, it was more like, I was like 11 years old. So like, it was kind of like, you're just like a shithead kid. It was just okay. Cool, but like now I think it's like the coolest thing ever,
Yeah. So, do you now a little later around this time, 10 or 11 or whatever, what kind of things were you doing in the neighborhood, in the city? Were you like starting to kind of expand? Were you riding Muni? What were you?
Yeah. So like junior high, I started to be because I had 5 siblings and I was one of the older ones. So it was like I started to get put on Muni, not like in a punitive way, but like, it was like, I went to school. My school was downtown, and so I could ride the N there, and so I would, a lot of days if I had something to do after school, I would ride the N back, and I also went to school right at sort of the gate of Chinatown, so cool. It was like if my friends and I, we would go exploring in Chinatown after school. And then I would take the N home, and it felt pretty cool.
Yeah. What school did you go to?
I went to Notre Dame des Victoires.
Okay, that's
a Catholic school.
That's over by the gate.
Yeah, it's right around the corner.
I was going to ask if you were exploring any other parts of the city.
Well, Chinatown for sure.
Yeah.
Like I was into Chinatown, and I'm still into Chinatown, but like
Yeah.
I was into Chinatown, and like we would go out and we would just, it was like, because I mean, it was, Chinatown is still, it's like there's some stores where you go in there and you're like, okay, I'll have, let's see here, I'll have the nudie deck of playing cards, the bucket of paint, that motorcycle in the corner, that weird woven basket, and yeah, let me get 2 Snicker bars. Like, it was just it was like we would just go into these, or like the we would go and just look at all this food that we couldn't tell what it was. It was interesting. I mean, it's like you just walk through the Stockton Street Tunnel, and I mean, I still feel this way. It's like you walk through the Stockton Street Tunnel, and it's like you are, it's like you just get transported,
Totally.
and I would hang out so me and my grade school friends would go and run, we would go run around Chinatown after school, and like, in like the financial district, like Union Square, we would just like, because that's, that was the easiest stuff to get to.
Right.
And then, I had some friends who lived in the Sunset, and there wasn't the same stuff to do in the Sunset, but like the park was there, and, I've always loved the park. So, we would spend a lot of time walking around Golden Gate Park with our little, cassette playing boombox.
Oh, hell yeah.
Just acting like miscreants, even though we were just, wimpy Catholic school kids.
Right. What an image. It's like, I don't know, kind of like a movie. Like
Yeah.
The Catholic school bad kids.
Yeah, I mean, which is to say that like we were really, really good kids.
Right, right.
Yeah,
In
like
fact, walking with the boombox is the worst thing that.
Yeah, walking with the boombox was the great transgression,
Yeah. Okay, let's move on a little bit now to high school years. Same school or different school or?
Different school.
Okay.
I went to St. Ignatius.
Okay.
On 37th Avenue, and I heard you just whisper, "Okay," which like I totally get. like I completely get it. But that's where I went,
Okay. If I said okay, it wasn't like okay.
No, I mean, but that's what it sounded like. So, I mean,
that's just the shitty internet connection.
No, but I get it. It's like, it's like everybody's got a reaction to that for some reason.
Well, no, to be honest, I've lived here little bit more than 20 years. I know the name, so that's really all I don't really know what it means to go to St. Ignatius. Do you want to speak to what it means? Like from your first-hand perspective?
I don't know. I still don't know what it means. It's a really good. I'll tell you what. I got a really good education there, and but it's look. Every big city in America has a Jesuit prep school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's one in every big city.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes 2, but usually 1. And it's got some name like Loyola or Xavier or St. Ignatius.
Right.
And it's like they all kind of carry this reputation as being like very serious and very like very serious places where like the leaders of tomorrow go to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
And they carry themselves that way, and they mean it, and they take that quite seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And there's good things and bad things about that. But that is where that's where I went to high school. And so when you tell people, because when you grow up in San Francisco, one of the things that you simply must do, especially now these days, because there's not that many people who grew up in San Francisco still in San Francisco, and you tell them like, oh, I grew up in San Francisco. Oh, where did you go to high school? That's the automatic question.
Right.
And so you tell people St. Ignatius, and it's like it's like this blue blazer like magically appears on me, and all of a sudden I have a side part, and I'm like talking about God only knows what. But
well, and now I'm gonna imagine everyone reacting to it with okay.
Well, yeah, like yeah. Well, and okay, so like, let me put it to you this way. Like, have you seen the movie The Last Black Man in San Francisco?
I have.
Okay. So the like kind of evil, kind of not really villainous real estate agent,
Yes.
okay, who is in some ways like quite smarmy, but in other ways is just doing his job.
Right.
It's in the dialogue of the movie.
That's right.
He says, "Oh, I went to St. Ignatius." And that's
right.
It's on purpose. Like,
Yes.
I mean, and the guy, first of all, they nailed it with the dialogue, and they nailed it with whoever they casted as like St. Ignatius Yehu numero uno, like they nailed it. Like that dude definitely sat next to me in geometry sophomore year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that rings a bell. So
yeah, like side part and like V-neck sweater for days.
Yeah. I do want to talk a little bit more about your high school years, but also instead of going into real estate, you went into comedy, it sounds like. But I'm getting
Correct.
ahead of
Yes.
us ourselves. So yeah, any other kind of, besides your well-known and reputable school, do you want to talk about high school years at all? Because did you say earlier that you got started with comedy kind of around the end of high school, or?
Yeah, like right around the end of high school. Like as soon as I figured out where to go,
Mm-hmm.
I went.
Okay.
And it was like I didn't waste any time. Because I was like a drama kid in high school. I would do the plays at my school. I would also do the plays at Mercy High School, which like, okay, if you want stories from high school that are worth telling to a San Francisco audience, here is it. I did the plays at Mercy High School, which is an all-girls Catholic school right across the street from Stonestown, right?
Okay.
And so we're talking about there was like 5 boys that they would cast in every production because they needed males to play the parts.
Right.
And like those are the only 5 boys on the physical grounds of the all-girls Mercy High School at any point. There are no other teenage boys allowed near the premises.
Right.
So there's only 5 of us, and there's like 500 of them.
Jeez.
You know, and they would do this thing, and we were dorks. I mean, we were extremely dorky fools. Like, I cannot stress this point. Like, think of the dorkiest kid you knew in high school. Like, we were a shade or two dorkier.
Yeah, he's walking into Golden Gate Park with a boom box, I think.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We were the bad kids we were the Catholic school bad kids, but we were the squabs of the century by any objective measure. That doesn't matter when you're the boys at Mercy High School, because that's it. Like, it's like they're looking at us and they're going, well, the goods are odd, but the odds are good, you know? And the thing is that they would do is, because we were in the plays at Mercy, they had something called preview day, where the play would be ready. You'd be in the play and you'd be ready to do the play. And before opening night, you would do something called preview day, where it was like an assembly at like 10 a.m. at Mercy High School. And you would get to you would do a couple of scenes from the play to sort of like gin up excitement to sell tickets for this high school play. Mm-hmm. And again, we're the only boys allowed into this school.
Five of you.
Yeah, we go on stage any one of us 5 goes on stage to do any scene. And it didn't matter how dorky we were. It was the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. Right. Like, just screaming. I've never felt terror like I did on stage at Mercy High School during preview day. And I remember because it was Midsummer Night's Dream, and there was one of the guys, his costume was like a vest with no shirt underneath, and he had like a late entrance into the scene. And so I'm going through my lines like barely. I don't get stage fright, but I could like barely get the words out because of like the tension in the air. And then like I was supposed to say something, and then this guy, this shirtless fool, was supposed to make an entrance. And I don't even get the word, like the last word out of my mouth. He doesn't even get his entrance line out of his mouth. And like the most earth-shaking, screeching sound I have ever heard as soon as this guy appears on stage with no shirt on, you know? I don't know how they slipped it past the nuns, to be perfectly honest.
Right. Liberties were taken. I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the one. That's me being a stage superstar in high school.
That was Arthur Gaus. Thursday on Storied San Francisco, Arthur will tell us how he got started doing comedy in the city. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis MacDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. The show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have nearly 150 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, subscribe, rate, and review our show so that we can reach even more folks. And if you'd like to drop us an old-fashioned email, we'd love it. The address is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.